HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Fight of the Century, Ali vs. Frazier, March 8, 1971, by Michael Arkush, read by J.D. Jackson. Preface. I was sitting alone in the lobby of the Eden Rock Hotel in Miami Beach one evening in mid-November 1970. I was 12. 6 weeks had gone by since I lost my father to Lou Gehrig's disease. He was only 51. More than ever, the world of professional sports consumed my time and energy. Nobody died in that world. Not on the field, at least. Then suddenly I saw Muhammad Ali. He was walking in the lobby and was alone too. We chatted, just the two of us. About what and for how long, I don't remember. I asked for his autograph, and soon it was over. From that moment, I loved reading about Ali in the paper, and there certainly was a lot to read. Nobody in the world I relied on to protect me generated more news more frequently and certainly with more flair than Muhammad Ali. Not Joe Namath, not Willie Mays, not Wilt Chamberlain. Nobody. When February 1971 came around, everybody seemed to be talking about Ali's upcoming fight against the heavyweight champion of the world, Joe Frazier. I did not understand everything I read, but I understood enough. I became more excited about a single sporting event than any before, or I might add, since. I did not see the fight. For many years I wished I had been in Madison Square Garden that evening. I wished I could have seen those two proud gladiators during one of their most courageous hours. As the years went by, I moved on to other interests. Girls, college, work, life. I became a journalist and was fortunate enough to meet other childhood heroes and attend many glorious events. I was in Dodger Stadium when a limping Kirk Gibson hit his historic ninth-inning home run against Dennis Eckersley to win the first game of the 1988 World Series. I saw my alma mater, the University of Michigan, capture the 1989 NCAA basketball title in Seattle over Seton Hall. I walked inside the ropes in Arizona to watch Jack Nicklaus rally to win a senior major in 1996, his last official tournament victory. These are wonderful experiences I will always cherish, but I would trade all of them to have been in the Garden on March 8, 1971. I've never understood why that fight has meant so much to me, then and now. Maybe because my father was taken from me before I ever learned who he truly was, I was drawn to these two men in their late 20s, full of life, indestructible, which is how I will always remember them. 1. Beating the system. Some Georgia politicians, Andrew Young, Julian Bond, Maynard Jackson, who launched their careers in the 1960s and 1970s, became famous. One, an ex-peanut farmer from the town of Plains, rose to the highest office in the land. Another became Speaker of the House. Yet there was one man in the state who, it could be said, was the most gifted of all in the art of power. He was not particularly well known outside of Georgia back then, and never would be. But inside, many folks heard of the Honorable Leroy Reginald Johnson, the Democratic state senator from the 38th District, the first African-American to serve in the state legislature in almost 92 years. He had this marvelous facility for getting along with other people, Bond said. My brother had some kind of traffic ticket problem, and I remember going with my parents to see Johnson. He said, "I'll take care of it." My father said, "Well, what do I owe you?" He was a lawyer. You expect to pay him. "That's okay," Johnson responded. "You can do something for me sometime." Without the criminal element, he was the godfather. He was the guy that you came to see to get things done, things that you could not do for yourself. Leroy Johnson was the first person Harry Pett thought of when, during the summer of 1970, his son-in-law, Robert Castle, who was recently involved in the promotion of his first boxing card, called him in Atlanta to find out if he knew of anyone in the city with real clout. Castle, an ambitious 30-year-old New York corporate attorney, did not expect too much. He knew that his father-in-law, who operated a small spice business, did not exactly mingle with society's movers and shakers, but Castle did not know where else to turn. Over the previous 3 years, not a single city in the entire nation demonstrated the courage to permit Muhammad Ali to resume his boxing career. The only reason Castle thought of Atlanta was that Atlanta was where he had attended college at Emory University for undergrad and law school, and where he met his first wife. Atlanta would serve his purpose as well as any other city. Pett, who had once met Johnson at a function, placed the call. "Senator, do you think that you might be able to get a license for Muhammad Ali to fight in Atlanta?" Pett asked Johnson. "If you can somehow find a way to put this together, we can make sure that Ali gets a contract." Johnson was no expert on the fight game, but he was definitely an expert on picking fights in the arena, which he mastered, fights he won more often than he lost. And here was one with enticing possibilities. If he was successful, he would make history, helping to put Ali back where he belonged, between the ropes, and he would make money, lots of it. For a black man in 1970, in the Deep South no less, Johnson in his early 40s did quite well for himself. He owned a house in northwest Atlanta and a cottage about 15 miles outside of town. But Johnson, who also worked in a downtown law practice, didn't get to where he was by running from opportunities to rise even higher. He told Pett he would check with his contacts and call him back in a few days. "My mission was to beat the system," Johnson recalled, "to say to the world that you cannot do this to a man just because of his color." On April 28, 1967, at 8 o'clock in the morning, Muhammad Ali walked into the United States Armed Forces Examination and Entrance Station at 701 San Jacinto Street in Houston. For much of the morning, Ali and the other recruits went through routine physical examinations and filled out paperwork. At about 1 p.m., they were taken to a room for their formal induction. After the ceremony, they would go by bus to Fort Polk, Louisiana, to begin their basic training. One name after another was called, each man stepping forward to symbolize his entrance into the armed forces. Then came Ali's turn. "Cassius Marcellus Clay," an officer said. Ali did not step forward. The officer called him by his preferred name, Ali, but it made no difference. Navy Lieutenant Clarence Hartman then brought Ali to a room down the hall to explain that his act of defiance was a felony that could be punished by 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. But upon returning to the first room, Ali again failed to move when his name was announced. Hartman asked Ali to write down the reason he would not accept service. "I refuse to be inducted into the armed forces of the United States because I claim to be exempt as a minister of the religion of Islam," he wrote. His refusal came as no surprise, and it epitomized the dramatic transformation in Ali and how he was perceived, since he first became a public figure when he captured the gold medal at the 1960 Olympic Games in Rome. Back then, he was known as Cassius Clay from Louisville, Kentucky, a hero adored for his charm, wit, and innocence. In 1964, he slayed the heavyweight champion, the mighty Sonny Liston, and shook up the world, as he put it. Within weeks, however, he changed his name to Muhammad Ali, a member of the Nation of Islam. Nothing, however, alienated Ali from his detractors as much as the famous comment he made in February 1966 after his draft status was reclassified to 1A. Man, I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong. To Ali, it made no sense to fight in a war to liberate the people of South Vietnam when members of his race were being mistreated back home. Within hours of refusing service, Ali was stripped of his crown by the New York State Athletic Commission and the World Boxing Association. Ali's decision was regarded by the commission to be detrimental to the best interests of boxing, stated Edwin B. Dooley, the chairman. On June 20th, 1967, Ali was convicted by a federal jury in Houston of violating the Selective Service Act. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and fined $10,000, the maximum penalty. The jury took only about 20 minutes before reaching a guilty verdict. Ali's lawyers filed an appeal. By the summer of 1970, when Harry Pett called Senator Leroy Johnson, Ali remained free on bail, hoping the Supreme Court would review his case. If the court chose not to hear it, Ali would have to serve his sentence. He had not appeared in an official bout since March 22, 1967. For blacks in Georgia, a proud member of the old Confederacy, the system was stacked against them from the start. Leroy Johnson, who grew up in an Atlanta ghetto, was no exception. One afternoon during the mid-1930s, instead of waiting patiently at the front door as he did every day to greet his cherished Aunt Minnie, a housekeeper being dropped off by her white female employer from the other side of town, the rich side, he ran to the car. He hugged his aunt, and then instinctively, he was 7 or 8, too young, too loving to comprehend bigotry, started to embrace the other woman, who was usually very friendly with him. The woman quickly pulled herself away, as if this harmless child would infect her with a horrible disease. Aunt Minnie seized Leroy's hand and ushered him immediately into the house. "Why didn't she hug me?" the boy wondered. "You will understand as you grow older," Aunt Minnie assured him, "that there is a difference between us and them." Aunt Minnie told Leroy something else that day he would never forget. "I want you to know that when God made you," she explained, "He was at His highest and best, and that you are as good as anybody." The message was constantly reinforced at Morehouse College, the distinguished private black liberal arts school in Atlanta that Johnson attended in the late 1940s with, in the class a year ahead, another student who dreamed of a colorblind America in his lifetime, Martin Luther King Jr. Morehouse made an impact on Johnson on his very first day when, during a rousing speech welcoming the student body, President Benjamin Elijah Mays, regarded later by Dr. King as his spiritual mentor and intellectual father, he would give the eulogy at King's funeral, warned, "You cannot and must not ever take segregation. When you go to a segregated theater, you are paying for segregation." Johnson became convinced that the president's stern words were meant specifically for him. A few days earlier, he had gone to see a picture at the Fox Theater downtown, taking a seat, as usual, in the upstairs balcony, the section set aside for blacks. "I thought Mays had seen me go into the theater," Johnson recalled. "I never again went to a segregated theater." After graduating from Morehouse in 1949, Johnson taught history and geography in the city's black schools for several years, until he realized that his true calling was not in academia, but in the legal profession, where he felt he could make the greatest difference on the major issues of the day. He earned his law degree from North Carolina College at Durham in 1957, and became the first African-American investigator in the district attorney's office in Atlanta. In 1962, he ran for a seat in the state Senate. The obstacles were enormous. A black man had not served in the Georgia legislature since Reconstruction. The system simply did not allow it. The system dictated that voters from all over Fulton County cast their ballots for each of the county's 7 seats instead of only for a single district. Residents from predominantly white areas were not about to choose one of them to protect their interests. On the campaign trail, especially in more rural towns, Johnson was heckled or, perhaps worse, ignored. In the fall election, he prevailed among the voters in his district, but did not capture a majority county-wide. But Leroy Johnson was a Morehouse man, and Morehouse men were taught never to give up. When a judge ruled that each seat was to be selected only by the voters within their respective district, Johnson was declared the victor. Gaining recognition from his peers proved to be just as challenging. During Johnson's first 30 days in office, none of the other legislators uttered a word to him. I would walk from the courthouse to the Senate chamber, meeting senators going in the opposite direction, he remembered. I would say, "Good morning, Senator." They would just look away. They thought that my being there was like a plague, that the ceiling would fall in and the seats would crumble. I was all alone in a lion's den. The silent treatment finally came to an abrupt end when Johnson arrived late one morning for an education committee meeting. Several senators rushed to his side. Johnson was, for the moment, no longer a black man trespassing on sacred white ground. He was a vote that counted as much as the others, a vote they needed to break a deadlock. Johnson put aside any resentment he might have still harbored. This was no time to let his hurt feelings get in the way of attaining the influence he coveted, and made the first of countless bargains, aligning himself with the senators who agreed to back several of his bills. "I learned that you get not what you deserve in politics," he said. "You get what you can negotiate." At times, Johnson was criticized by members of his own race for not shaking things up enough in the white-dominated body, but he strongly believed the most prudent way to achieve long-term progress for blacks in the South was to not only beat the system, but, as often as possible, to work within it. On the other hand, he recognized that not every right could be obtained through skillful negotiation. Some rights needed to be seized. Johnson was adamant from the day he was sworn in that he deserved to receive the same privileges as every other member of this exclusive club. One afternoon, with assistance from one of his few friends in the chamber, Senator Joe Salome, Johnson decided he would attempt to desegregate the cafeteria in the Georgia state capitol. "Senator Johnson and I are going to have lunch," Salome told senators headed toward the cafeteria. "Please come and have lunch with us." Nobody accepted the invitation, which of course did not come as a tremendous shock. After all, this was early 1963, before the March on Washington and Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, before the landmark 1964 Civil Rights Bill, before the South finally surrendered for the second and last time. The rejections did not deter the Morehouse man for 1 second. He picked up a tray, filled it with a few items, and calmly joined his friend in the checkout line. "We can't serve you," said the agitated woman behind the register. Johnson did not budge. "Young lady," he replied without raising his voice, "I am a state senator, and I intend to eat here in the state cafeteria." The woman went to see her supervisor. A few minutes later, she returned, defeated. "Give me your money," she told him. Johnson and Salome found a table, but as soon as they sat down, senators on both sides stood up and walked away. The two did not let this demonstration spoil their moment of triumph. The cafeteria in the state capital of the Commonwealth of Georgia was officially desegregated. "I had done what Morehouse College had trained me to do," Johnson said. The fight to obtain a boxing license for Muhammad Ali, if Johnson was to take it on, would be among the toughest of his political career. Since Ali's last official appearance in the ring against the aging Zora Fali at the old Madison Square Garden on 8th Avenue between 49th and 50th Streets in New York City, in which he defended his crown for the 9th time with a 7th-round knockout, people who knew a heck of a lot more about the sweet science than an outsider from, for heaven's sake, Georgia, had failed in dozens of attempts to put the deposed champion back to work. Georgia was, after all, where the Ku Klux Klan still held rallies at Stone Mountain, noted for its monumental carving of Civil War generals Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson and Confederacy President Jefferson Davis on horseback, and where an ardent segregationist, Lester G. Maddox, resided in the governor's mansion. Elected officials and boxing commissioners throughout the United States refused to support Ali's bid for a boxing license. The boxing commissioners were afraid that they would lose these patronage jobs, which is all they were, said the New York Times' Robert Lipsyte, who wrote about Ali extensively in the 1960s and 1970s. It was very easy to turn him down. It was a wonderful way for all these hacks to show their allegiance to the governors or mayors who appointed them. Nor was Ali permitted to leave the country while he remained free on bail. Proposals for title bouts in Japan and Canada were turned down. In Canada, Ali was to be escorted by federal marshals after posting a $100,000 cash bond and to stay on foreign soil for less than 24 hours. But the Fifth United States Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans denied his request without comment. The Gila River Indians in Sacaton, Arizona, whose reservation was outside the jurisdiction of the state's athletic commission, refused to sanction a rematch between Ali and Fali. The Gila River Tribal Council determined that giving Ali a license would desecrate the land some of our brave boys have walked on, although other factors may have played a role in its decision. The story I got, former Newark Star-Ledger columnist Jerry Eisenberg said, was that there was a call from the Interior Department asking whoever was on the tribal council, "Do you really want to keep getting that poverty money?" And then there was a change of heart. Despite the growing anti-war movement on college campuses and the profound effect on public opinion of the ghastly images appearing in dying color on the evening news and in the weekly magazines, many Americans stood behind the Johnson and subsequently the Nixon administration's campaign in Vietnam, or at the very least considered Ali unpatriotic for his refusal to serve. Nonetheless, those lured by the potential record-setting payday of an Ali comeback fight continued to search for a receptive politician, and, on several occasions, it appeared they just might succeed. In December 1969, Florida Governor Claude Kirk loaned his support to a bout in Tampa between Ali and a certain fighter out of Philadelphia. This fighter did not possess a long reach, did not throw many traditional combinations, and could at times be quite vulnerable. Yet he did not back off for an instant, and in the view of those who closely followed boxing, he was more formidable than anyone Ali ever faced, and that included Sonny Liston. The fighter was Smokin' Joe Frazier. "I think Mr. Frazier can easily beat Mr. Clay," Kirk said. "You know, there was some talk that Mr. Clay lost his title because of politics instead of due to fisticuffs, and I'd be glad if we could promote a fight in Tampa to settle this." Within days, however, after fierce opposition emerged, an editorial in the Tampa Tribune proclaimed, "We object conscientiously," the governor changed his mind. "While I would like to see Frazier put his fists right on Mohammed Blah," Kirk said, "I have heard from enough people in Florida to know that they do not want the fight to take place in Florida. It comes as a surprise to me that a man who lacks the courage to fight for his country could have the guts to get into the ring. I see no reason why an alleged draft dodger should be in a position to lay claim to any title." Months later, Ali's attorney, Bob Arum, launched an effort to stage the fight in the future capital of professional boxing, Las Vegas, Nevada. Arum, who along with Don King would become the premier promoter during the last quarter of the 20th century, persuaded Ali and Frazier to sign contracts. Meanwhile, the well-known handicapper Jimmy the Greek Snyder secured the approval of Governor Paul Laxalt. Nobody stood in the way. Well, almost nobody. Arum was about to go into a meeting in the basement of a hotel on the Strip with members of the Nevada Athletic Commission, Governor Laxalt, and Snyder when the phone rang. It was Bob Mayhew asking for Snyder. Mayhew was an important player in Vegas. Jimmy went white, Arum recalled. "You work with us for the resort's interests," Mayhew reminded Snyder. Snyder did indeed. Mayhew explained that their boss did not want Ali to fight in his state. The call ended, and so did the negotiations. Their boss was Howard Hughes. The reason for his opposition was the usual one: Ali's stance on the draft. "The governor was embarrassed," Arum said, "but I got him off the hook. I told him, look, I'm going to pull the application," which is what I did. Some proposals were downright bizarre. One was for Ali to fight in a bull ring in Tijuana, another at a rodeo arena in Tulsa. Perhaps the most unconventional of all surfaced from the mind of Murray Warrener, a Miami promoter who achieved a degree of success with The First Christmas, Easter the Beginning, and July 4th, 1776, radio recreations of historic events delivered as modern newscasts. Warrener had already put together Ali's only fights during the exile, the results decided by a machine instead of man. Over 100 variables, the ability to absorb a punch, punching power, tendency to get cut, courage, and so on, compiled by boxing experts, were fed into a national cash register computer in Dayton, Ohio. Among 16 greats in Warrener's all-time heavyweight tournament and championship fight, broadcast over nearly 400 radio stations, Ali lost to James Jeffries, the great white hope from the early 20th century. Ali filed a $1 million suit against Warrener for defamation of character for losing to Jeffries, but it was dropped when he was paid $10,000 for a computer match in 1969 against Rocky Marciano. Marciano, 45, who retired undefeated in 1956, took the challenge seriously, shedding about 50 pounds and putting on a new toupee. "He was so happy to be back," said Ferdie Pacheco, Ali's longtime doctor who took part in the production. "He wanted to fight for real." Too real for Ali's comfort. "He did hit Ali several times hard," Pacheco said. Ali told him, "Hey, if we play that game, then I'm going to start punching you and they're going to start sewing you up." Marciano was quite impressed with Ali. "My God, the kid is so fast," he kept saying. The finished product drew a fair amount of coverage, a commentary on a sport lacking in excitement since the banishment of its charismatic leading man. Love Ali or hate Ali, it would be nearly impossible to find anyone in America who was neutral toward the man in the late 1960s. People wanted to see him between the ropes, no matter how contrived or commercial the enterprise might be. "I could announce tomorrow that Muhammad Ali will walk across the Hudson River and charge $20 admission," Teddy Brenner, the Madison Square Garden matchmaker, once said, "and there would be 20,000 down there to see him do it, and half of them would be rooting for him to do it, and the other half would be rooting for him to sink." The computer fight was shown on closed-circuit television on January 20th, 1970. A Marciano left hook knocking Ali out in the 13th round. It was reported at the time that after fans complained in England about the outcome, a new version was shown a week later with Ali triumphant. Marciano, the story said, was seen with his arms raised in protest after the fight was halted because of cuts. However, David Warrener, Murray's son, who was involved in a documentary about the fight in recent years, said the England story was a hoax. In any case, Marciano died in a plane crash in Iowa on August 30.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?